Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are here, as always, to take that stack of source material you've given us and really just break it all down into the most interesting, insightful, and just fascinating analysis we can.
And today, we are strapping in for a really deep descent into the career of Christopher George Latore Wallace.
A career that was, towering in its influence, but just so tragically short.
And he's a figure known globally by, so many names, right?
Biggie Smalls, Biggie.
Notorious B.I.G, yeah. And then you have his aliases, Frank White, Big Papa. But to frame this deep dive correctly, you have to understand we're not just analyzing a rapper who was, really successful.
No, not at all.
We're looking at a commercial and a cultural phenomenon, a figure who, according to sources like Rolling Stone and Billboard, is often just crowned the greatest rapper of all time.
And the staggering velocity of his success, that really defines the whole narrative we're about to unpack. We're talking about a core creative period that spans, just 5 active years? From 1992 to 1997.
It's an incredibly short window. And yet, in that time, his certified U.S. sales go past 28 million copies.
28 million.
With 21 million of those being just albums, that kind of commercial impact achieved so quickly, it's almost unprecedented.
It really is. It speaks to the absolute vacuum he must have filled in the genre at that time, and just the immediate magnetism of his storytelling.
He's an enduring historical figure now, officially cemented by his 2020 induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So our mission today is to trace the extreme, almost unbelievable contrasts in his journey.
And there are so many. You have the honor student who becomes this hardened drug dealer.
The artist who's credited with literally saving East Coast hip-hop from becoming commercially irrelevant.
And of course, the central figure in a feud that really defined and, ultimately curtailed a whole generation of rap music.
It's a journey that's just rooted in this idea of duality, and it starts right there in his childhood in Brooklyn.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So, Christopher Wallace. He was born on May 21st, 1972, in Brooklyn, New York City. His parents were Jamaican immigrants.
His mother, Violetta Wallace, was a preschool teacher.
Right. And his father, Selwyn George Latore, was a welder and, interestingly, a politician. But the critical piece here, and this shapes everything, is that his father left the family when Wallace was barely 3 years old.
And that absence meant his mother really became the defining, the stabilizing force in his life. She's raising him all alone, working 2 jobs to make it happen.
And what's so striking when you look at the sources is this stark contrast. The contrast between the environment he's growing up in and the path he was, intellectually prepared for.
He was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. He went to St. Peter Claver Parish Elementary School, graduated in 1982, and he was genuinely good at school. He excelled, particularly in English.
It's so important to linger on that fact. He excelled in English. He had this innate ability for language, for narrative, for structure.
The exact skills that would later define his mastery as an MC.
Exactly. Yet this academic promise was in a constant battle with the realities of his environment. He grew up in Clinton Hill, right near the border of Bed-Stuy. And the activities on Fulton Street back then, drug dealing, alcoholism, gambling, it was all just there. It was commonplace. It was visible.
Right. If he had just followed that academic path, who knows what he might have become. But then the 1980s and early 90s, the crack epidemic, it provided a very different, a much faster and a much more lucrative path.
And the sources confirm he started dealing marijuana when he was only around 12 years old.
12.
That's just a devastating pivot point for a kid with so much academic potential.
Well, it really speaks to the economics of the time, doesn't it? The street hustle offered a kind of stability, a kind of income stream that academic at that very moment just couldn't promise.
And this leads us to the origin of his first and probably most enduring nickname.
Yeah. He attended Westinghouse High School, which, incidentally, is the same school attended by other future legends. Jay-Z and Busta Rhymes were his classmates.
Can you imagine? And because of his size, weighing about 91 kilograms or 201 pounds, he was just big.
That dual identity was just a constant part of his life. He's still living under his strict mother's roof, which forced him to, engage in these elaborate ways to hide what he was doing.
We know from the sources that he hid the cash he earned from dealing on the roof of their apartment building.
And she only found out about that, this massive secret, when he was 20 years old.
That's the pressure cooker he was living in. The hustle demanded more and more of his time, more than school, and that led him to drop out at 16 to deal full-time. And that shift, well, it immediately introduced escalating legal stakes.
Right, let's detail that because it happened so fast. It started in 1989 with an arrest in Brooklyn on weapons charges. That got him 5 years of probation.
Which is a pretty serious warning shot for a teenager.
And he didn't listen to it. He violated that probation the very next year.
And the real consequence came in 1991. He was arrested in North Carolina for dealing crack cocaine. This wasn't a small thing. He served 9 months in jail before he could even make bail.
And the sources suggest that having served that time, the risk of going back to the street life just became too high. It added this genuine urgency to his pivot towards music.
So just as the criminality is peaking, his musical identity is starting to crystallize.
What was he listening to? How did he even develop that voice?
His foundation was incredibly broad. He was deeply influenced by soul and R&B, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Teddy Pendergrass.
Which gave him a certain sensitivity that I think sometimes surprised people.
It did. And he loved funk, groups like Kool and the Gang, Parliament Funkadelic. Plus, his Jamaican heritage introduced him to jazz, reggae, mento. It was this perfect fusion of rhythm and lyrical introspection.
He started rapping at first as MC West in a group called The Techniques. He was working in the home studio of a saxophonist, Donald Harrison.
But the more famous stage name he adopted was Biggie Smalls, which he borrowed from a character in that 1975 film, Let's Do It Again.
So after he gets out of jail in 1991, he creates his first demo tape, Microphone Murderer, with DJ 50 Grand.
And what's so fascinating is the sources tell us he had little ambition for this tape. He was still focused on the grind, maybe seeing rapping as just a side hustle. This tape wasn't his, desperate bid for fame. It was just something he did.
But sometimes that lack of desperation allows for pure authenticity. And here's where fate really steps in. A local DJ, Mr. C, gets a hold of the tape and starts promoting it heavily.
This catches the eye of the Source magazine, which leads to him being featured in their prestigious Unsigned Hype section in March of 1992.
And that Source feature was the literal launching pad.
It was everything. Sean Combs, then a young A&R exec at Uptown Records, reads it and immediately arranges a meeting. Wallace signs with Uptown in March 1992. And that's the moment music becomes a legitimate, real business alternative to the streets.
His initial exposure was so crucial for building credibility. He started doing these guest spots on remixes, most notably the remix of Mary J. Blige's Real Love.
Which got him in front of a huge established R&B audience. And then he landed his first solo track for Uptown in 1993, Party and Bullshit.
And the sources reference the influence of the Last Poets on that track. I think this is a crucial detail because it speaks to his lyrical sophistication.
It really does. The Last Poets weren't, your typical rap progenitors. They were a collective of poets and musicians from the late 60s who basically pioneered spoken word poetry over minimalist percussion.
And they were focused so heavily on social commentary, black nationalism, revolutionary thought.
So when Biggie says party and bullshit, it's not just a party track. He's filtering his narrative through this lens of profound social commentary that was established by that earlier movement. He's saying, I understand the historical weight of my voice.
But his relationship with Uptown gets violently interrupted, doesn't it?
It does. In July 1993, Combs is famously fired by his mentor, Andre Harrell, from Uptown. This is a completely chaotic moment because Combs lost access to all the debut tracks they had just recorded for Wallace.
But Combs didn't miss a beat. He immediately launches Bad Boy Records, makes Wallace his flagship artist. And he had to be aggressive here, not just professionally, but personally.
Yeah.
Really pushing Wallace to permanently abandon the drug trade and trust the music career.
And this professional shift led to that final, iconic name change. He couldn't keep using Biggie Smalls because the name was already taken legally.
So he becomes the Notorious B.I.G. And he defines B.I.G. as business instead of game.
That acronym is just incredibly loaded. It perfectly encapsulates his new worldview. It's not just some cool name, it's a mission statement.
Right. It signifies leaving the emotional, the dangerous, the spontaneous street game for the calculated, strategic world of major label business.
And Combs had to prove that the business was serious. He struck a landmark deal with Clive Davis, the CEO of Arista Records, and secured a $1.5 million advance and creative control over his new label.
And he then used that advance money to repurchase all of Wallace's recorded masters from Harrell, which ensured the debut album could actually proceed.
That one move cemented the partnership between the artist and the business mogul.
But what's often overshadowed by all these professional fireworks is a personal anchor he gained right before this major transition.
His daughter.
The birth of his daughter, Tiana Dream Wallace, on August 8th, 1993.
And the sources reveal this was a completely transformative event. It links directly back to his earlier academic life. Wallace promised his daughter everything she wanted. He connected his drive for financial success to the unfulfilled potential he felt he'd wasted by dropping out of school.
He didn't want Tiana to face that same lack of opportunity. And that pressure, that need to provide, it fueled the creation of one of the greatest debuts in hip-hop history.
That immense pressure really culminated in the release of Ready to Die on September 13th, 1994. And to understand its impact, you really have to look at the landscape of 1994 hip-hop.
Absolutely. The genre had undergone this massive geographical shift. West Coast hip-hop was just utterly dominating the U.S. charts.
We're talking about the reign of Death Row Records, the G-Funk sound. It's characterized by those smooth, synthesized bass lines, P-Funk samples, and narratives often centered on California life, hedonism, gangsterism.
And East Coast rap, particularly New York City's sound, had become, commercially muted in comparison.
The sources explicitly credit Ready to Die as the force that restored East Coast hip-hop's prominence. It was a declaration that New York still had the lyricists and the sound to compete.
But the production itself was a calculated risk. Wallace wanted a sound that was bold, violent, and darkly humorous, a lot like the West Coast hits, but infused with a distinctly grittier, more complex East Coast lyrical approach.
And you see the tension between the artistic vision and the business strategy playing out almost immediately. Wallace, for instance, he initially wanted to name the album The Teflon Don,
drawing inspiration from the mob boss, John Gotti. A title that emphasizes that calculated, untouchable nature of the hustler.
Exactly. But Combs, ever the marketer, he vetoed it. He insisted on Ready to Die, a title designed for maximum emotional impact and, let's be honest, mass market shock value.
And Wallace conceded. It highlights that early dynamic where the artistic vision was shaped, but ultimately guided, by the commercial imperative of Bad Boy.
And the disagreement over the lead single is equally telling. Wallace preferred the funky, upbeat track Machine Gun Funk,
which really leans into that hard-edged persona.
Right. But Combs wanted something that would smoothly transition Biggie into that mainstream R&B audience that Uptown Records had already cultivated.
And that strategic choice led to the release of that incredibly successful double A-side, Juicy Unbelievable, which proved Combs was right. It hit number 27 on the pop charts.
Juicy was the defining moment. It's this nostalgic, aspirational anthem that perfectly bridged the gap between the underground and the mainstream. That story of moving from welfare to private stock.
The commercial triumph was just instantaneous.
Yeah.
And sustained. Ready to Die debuted strong, selling 500,000 copies in the first week.
And it generated two other colossal singles. The platinum-selling, smoothness-defined Big Papa, which became a staple everywhere.
And One More Chance, which sold 1 million copies in 1995 alone. The album eventually went 4 times platinum.
So let's deepen the artistic analysis here. Wallace himself famously described the album as a big pie, with each track representing a different slice of his life.
And that concept allowed him to transition seamlessly between all these personas, the smooth player, the hard hustler, the vulnerable man.
Critics just devoured that duality. Rolling Stone praised the album for the contrast between its bleak street visions and these moments of high-spirited fun. They argued it brought the pleasure principle back to hip-hop.
After years of really dense social commentary and abrasive sounds, Biggie made listening to rap fun again, even while talking about these grim realities.
But the grim realities were always, always present. We know from the sources that Wallace admitted he felt broke and depressed while making the album, despite the massive advance.
And the ultimate display of his artistic honesty comes right at the very end of the record.
The closing track, Suicidal Thoughts. It's a devastating conclusion. Just a raw, stripped-down narrative that illustrates that thread of paranoia, depression, and self-destructive tendencies he admitted to feeling.
If the album's a pie, that track is the sour aftertaste. It reminds you of the intense psychological cost of the life he was celebrating in the singles. It elevates the whole album from a commercial triumph to a complex tragedy.
And concurrent with his explosive solo career, he immediately used his leverage to establish the group Junior MAFIA in 1994.
Which was made up of his childhood friends like Lil' Kim and Lil' Cease.
The name itself, it's a backronym for Masters at Finding Intelligent Attitudes. It reflects that whole B.I.G. philosophy. The idea that the street crew was transitioning to a smart, savvy business operation.
And their 1995 debut album, Conspiracy, was a success. It went gold, and it spawned major hits like Player's Anthem and the platinum-selling Get Money.
which became famous for its Battle of the Sexes dynamic, featuring Lil' Kim's breakout performance.
So by the end of 1995, Wallace's dominance was just undisputed. He was the top-selling male solo artist and rapper on both the U.S. pop and R&B charts. The level of crossover appeal was staggering.
And the sources highlight his high-profile collaborations outside of hip-hop, showing that his voice just transcended genre. The most surprising was his appearance on Michael Jackson's 1995 History Continues album.
On the song this time around. And this collaboration presents one of those genuinely complex historical nuggets that you have to look at closely.
We have these conflicting recollections from that time. Lil Cease recalled that Wallace made him stay behind, saying he didn't trust Michael with kids because of the serious 1993 allegations surrounding Jackson.
Which sounds very much like a street-hardened, cynical perspective.
But then, the recording engineer, John Van Nest, offered a radically different account. He recalled Wallace being so excited to meet Jackson that he was nearly brought to tears.
So what does this conflict tell us? It reveals the complexity of his persona. He was operating in this intensely judgmental world, but also retained a fundamental awe for pop superstardom.
He could project cynicism to his entourage while, maintaining this true reverence privately.
It just underscores his status at that time. He was also collaborating with Shaquille O'Neal, R&B group's 112 Total. The industry crowned him immediately, and it all culminated in a dominant performance at the 1995 Source Awards.
He just swept the major categories: Best New Artist, Lyricist of the Year, Live Performer, and Album of the Year. And that clean sweep was so crucial because the Source was the Bible of hip-hop then.
Its awards were a measure of critical street credibility, not just sales.
So winning Lyricist of the Year proved his technical skill was recognized as the absolute best in the genre. He solidified his title as Rap Artist of the Year at the Billboard Awards as well. He was definitively the King of New York.
And this meteoric rise immediately placed him at the center of the era's most tragic conflict. The foundation of the East Coast-West Coast rivalry was actually rooted in a very close friendship.
Yes, between Wallace and Tupac Shakur. The sources confirm they were very close around 93 and 94. They traveled together frequently.
Lil Cease's memories of their closeness are particularly vivid. There was genuine mutual respect there.
Absolutely. Some people, like the Oakland MC Yuck Myth, believe Shakur even influenced Wallace's early lyrical style. They were two masters of narrative, and they initially bonded over their craft.
That bond shattered in April 1995. While he was in prison, Tupac Shakur accused Combs, Harrell, and Wallace of having prior knowledge of that November 1994 robbery where he was shot 5 times.
Right, in a recording studio lobby, he was robbed of thousands of dollars in jewelry. And Wallace vehemently denied this. He characterized his presence in the studio that night as just a coincidence.
He felt betrayed that Shakur would so readily lean the blame on me. And this accusation, whether it was true or not, it turned a personal tragedy into a high-stakes professional conflict that defined both of their final years.
And what's fascinating and really important for the historical record is that the motive for that original robbery is still intensely debated. The sources mention a 2012 confession by a convicted killer, Dexter Isaac,
who claimed the robbery was actually orchestrated by an executive, James Rosemond.
Which adds so much complexity. It suggests the initial spark for the feud wasn't even a rivalry between the artists, but a separate, purely financial power play between executives. But that perception that Wallace was involved, it just persisted.
So when Shakur was released and signed with Death Row Records in October 1995, Bad Boy and Death Row became direct, bitter business rivals. And it just dramatically raised the stakes of that geographical tension.
The narrative around the shooting immediately focused on Wallace's music. His track, Who Shot Ya, which was released in February 1995 as the B-side to Big Papa, was universally interpreted by the public and the media as a direct taunt toward Shakur.
And this is where perception completely overrides whatever the intent was.
Totally. Lil Cease maintained that the track was recorded before the shooting, that it was originally an intro for a Mary J. Blige album, but Wallace kept it because, quote, the shit was too hard.
But in that escalating atmosphere of paranoia, that explanation just didn't matter. For Shakur, and for the fans, the title was just too explicit to be a coincidence.
The rivalry then peaked and became deeply personal in June 1996, when Shakur released the aggressively hostile diss track, Hit 'Em Up.
And it didn't just target Wallace, it targeted Combs, Jr. MAFIA, and it specifically claimed he had an affair with Wallace's estranged wife, Faith Evans.
While also accusing Wallace of copying his entire style and image. It was a complete declaration of war.
So, faced with this highly public, deeply humiliating assault, What does Wallace do? He reverts to his core coping mechanism.
He later explained that he always dealt with hardship, even back in elementary school, by using humor. He said, "I gotta make jokes about it. I can't be the guy running around all serious." Humor became his shield.
And we see that play out lyrically on the Jay-Z duet Brooklyn's Finest. He drops that famous and highly technical line, "If Faith has twins, she'll probably have two packs. Get it, two packs."
It's an incredibly clever double entendre that acknowledges the accusation while just dismissing it through pure verbal dexterity.
But while he was navigating this public firestorm, his personal life was in complete chaos.
He had met and married the R&B singer Faith Evans very quickly back in August 1994, after only knowing her for 2 months.
And they were separated by 1996. During that separation, he had a high-profile affair with Lil' Kim, which resulted in a pregnancy and then an abortion. And he also began a relationship with Charlie Baltimore.
The legal troubles also never really stopped, which just compounded the stress. In March 1996, he had a very public outburst, chasing and threatening two fans outside a Manhattan nightclub.
Smashing the windows of their taxi, punching one of them.
That incident resulted in him pleading guilty to second-degree harassment and getting 100 hours of community service. And then later that same year, he's arrested again at his home in New Jersey on drug and weapons charges.
He was constantly struggling with the remnants of his former life while trying to maintain this new superstardom.
Then the ultimate tragedy struck. It solidified the deadly reputation of the feud. Tupac Shakur was shot on September 7th, 1996, and he died 6 days later.
And Wallace's reaction, according to Faith Evans, was immediate shock and intense fear.
He called her genuinely distraught. He told her he never thought Shakur would actually die. He recalled saying he'll be out in the morning smoking some weed, drinking Hennessy or whatever. There was this deep-seated belief that they were both, untouchable legends.
But because of Shakur's public accusations, Wallace immediately fell under suspicion. This was heightened by a really controversial 2002 Los Angeles Times report that claimed Wallace had actually paid for the gun used in the shooting.
And that specific claim created an intense backlash. The Wallace family quickly provided documents asserting what they said was an ironclad alibi, that Wallace was recording the track Nasty Boy in New Jersey that night.
But here's where that detail becomes inconclusive and just fuels more conspiracy theories. The New York Times later called those alibi documents inconclusive.
Right. The recording engineer couldn't specifically recall the exact date of the session. He indicated that he probably would have heard about the shooting if it had happened that same night.
So the key takeaway here isn't whether he was guilty or innocent. It's that the evidence surrounding his alibi was just ambiguous enough to fuel ongoing speculation. And that just increased his paranoia and public vulnerability.
Amid all this psychological trauma and fear, he then suffers a severe physical injury. While recording his second album, Wallace and Lil Cease were arrested, which led to their car being repossessed.
So they rented a Chevrolet Lumina SUV. Cease had warned Wallace about the faulty brakes, concerns that were validated when the car crashed heavily into a rail.
That crash broke Wallace's left leg. He spent months in the hospital and was initially confined to a wheelchair. He had to rely on a cane for mobility right up until his death.
But this life-altering trauma, though devastating, immediately became fodder for his art.
Yes. He directly referenced the incident on the track Long Kiss Goodnight with the line, "Ya still tickle me, I used to be as strong as Rippleby till Lil Cease crippled me."
It's a perfect example of his ability to just instantaneously internalize and then externalize profound personal suffering through these clever, complex lyrical structures.
And despite the injuries and the chaos, his personal life did move forward. Faith Evans gave birth to their son, Christopher C.J. Wallace Jr., on October 29, 1996.
Giving him one more major emotional anchor just months before his death.
The 18 months spent recording what would become Life After Death really transformed Christopher Wallace as an artist. The title itself, it signals this massive thematic shift.
He explained that he was moving away from the fuck the world, fuck my mom, anger and frustration that characterized his debut.
He claimed the new focus was on family and achieving peace of mind. But that thematic intention, it contrasts interestingly with the final product's presentation.
Yeah, XXL Mag observed that he revamped his image. He transformed from the vulnerable, sometimes remorseful mid-level hustler of Ready to Die into a calculated, almost mythological drug lord figure on his second album.
And that new, deeper persona, it matched his voice, which critics noted had become even lower and more commanding. His vocal mastery is something we really have to spend time on. He possessed this powerful baritone delivery, which Rolling Stone described as a thick, jaunty grumble.
What made his delivery so singular was his incredible technical precision. Time magazine specifically highlighted his ability to smoothly deliver multisyllabic rhymes, a hallmark of complexity, while maintaining a conversational, fluid rhythm.
Which is why his lyrics never sounded like he was just reading off a page.
And that's because he often wasn't. The sources confirm he famously composed his lyrics almost entirely in his head. He relied on intense concentration to craft complex rhyme schemes before ever committing them to paper.
And that method lends his tracks a unique spontaneity and effortlessness.
His sonic signatures were instantly recognizable, too. We know Sean Combs's enthusiastic ad-libs were frequently integrated into his tracks, but Wallace also employed his own distinctive vocal cues.
That signature drawn out at the start of tracks like Hypnotize and Big Papa.
Exactly, and those weren't just filler. They acted as a kind of musical punctuation, framing his verses.
He was a true musical chameleon, adapting his flow to fit any production or collaborator. Big Daddy Kane, a lyricism titan himself, noted that Wallace didn't rely on an extensive vocabulary, but he just put his words together a slick way, and it worked well for him.
And you see that flexibility in his choice of collaborations, too. He famously used a slow falsetto on the track Playa Hater, showing melodic range, and then on Notorious Thugs, he successfully adopted that rapid-fire, choppy, triple-time rhyme flow of Bone Thugs and Harmony,
proving he could master any stylistic challenge presented to him.
The album development finally concluded in January 1997. It was scheduled for a major March 25 release.
He headed to California in February for a crucial promotional push. The massive scale of his comeback was symbolized by that $700,000 video shoot for the lead single, Hypnotize, which came out on March 4, 1997.
It was an extravagant, unambiguous statement that the king was back.
He also recorded his final vocal appearances for Combs' upcoming album, which was initially titled Hell Up in Harlem. It was quickly retitled No Way Out after what happened next. Wallace was operating at the absolute peak of his global influence.
And then, the music world received a devastating, shocking blow.
The murder occurred late Sunday night, March 9, 1997, in Los Angeles, California. Wallace was in town for the 11th annual Soul Train Music Awards.
And he was attending a high-profile after-party hosted by Vibe magazine and Quest Records at the Peterson Automotive Museum.
The sources detail the chaos just before the event. The venue was massively overcrowded, with over 2,000 guests, which forced the fire marshals to shut the party down at 12:35 a.m.
This spontaneous closure pushed a huge number of high-profile attendees, including Wallace, out onto the surrounding streets all at once.
Wallace left the museum around 12:40 a.m., traveling in the front passenger seat of a rented Chevrolet Suburban. He was with his associates Damien D. Rock Butler and Lil Cease.
Sean Combs was traveling in a separate Suburban ahead of them, guarded by 2 off-duty police officers.
As Wallace's Suburban stopped at a red light less than 50 yards from the museum, a black 1994-96 Chevrolet Impala SS pulled up alongside his car.
And the lack of witnesses who could identify the assailant is still central to the mystery. The sources describe the gunman only as an unidentified African-American man in a very specific outfit: a blue suit and a bow tie.
The assailant rolled down his window, drew a 9mm blue steel pistol, and just fired into Wallace's vehicle. Wallace was struck by 4 bullets. His entourage rushed him immediately to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center.
He was pronounced dead at 1:15 a.m. He was just 24 years old.
And for those interested in the painful details, the autopsy report, which was released 15 years later, it provided a crucial clarification. Only the final of the 4 shots was actually fatal.
That bullet struck his right hip and caused just devastating internal injuries. It damaged his colon, his liver, his heart, and his left lung before lodging in his shoulder. He died from massive internal hemorrhaging.
The loss was just felt so deeply across the entire industry. His funeral was held in Manhattan on March 18, attended by over 350 mourners.
Figures like Queen Latifah, Lil' Kim, Run DMC, Clive Davis, they're all there. After the ceremony, his body was cremated at the Fresh Pond Crematory in Queens.
The reaction to his death transformed his final work, Life After Death, into this monumental cultural moment. It was released just 16 days after his murder on March 25, 1997.
And it debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200.
This was just unprecedented success, tied so tragically to his death. It quickly achieved 4 times platinum certification, and at the time, it tied with MC Hammer's 1990 Smash Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em as one of the best-selling rap albums ever.
The public reaction was one of mourning, combined with this intense cultural consumption.
And his posthumous chart dominance was equally stunning. Wallace became the first artist in history to achieve 2 posthumous #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100.
Pivot ties and money mo problems.
Which meant that, even after his death, his music defined the sound of the summer of 1997.
And Sean Combs made sure Wallace's memory was inescapable that year. Combs' album No Way Out was just saturated with Wallace's presence, featuring him on 5 tracks.
And it included that massive, globally successful chart topper, I'll Be Missing You, which was dedicated directly to Wallace's memory. The Grammy Awards recognized this impact in 1998, with Life After Death and its major singles receiving multiple rap nominations.
And the music machine just continued to roll out material for years. Subsequent posthumous albums followed, using new verses and unreleased recordings.
Born Again arrived in 1999, which controversially featured new collaborators he hadn't worked with in life, like Eminem and Missy Elliott, showcasing his adaptability across generations.
Then came Duets, the final chapter in 2005. And Combs and Wallace's mother, Valletta, stated this would be the final album primarily featuring new, original Biggie material. They were trying to provide some closure to his official catalog.
But the value of his unique voice ensured it kept surfacing in major releases. His vocals were featured on Michael Jackson's 2001 Invincible album, on the track Unbreakable.
And in one of the ultimate ironies of hip-hop history, his voice was eventually paired with Tupac Shakur's on the track Runnin', Dying to Live, released in 2003.
Finally uniting the feuding legends in a collaboration that neither of them lived to see.
This ongoing influence just solidified his critical legacy. It led to that high praise we cited at the beginning of this deep dive.
AllMusic declared him nothing less than the savior of East Coast hip-hop. And MTV, in 2006, ranked him #3 on their list of the greatest MCs of all time, calling him possibly the most skillful ever on the mic.
And that acclaim has only grown. Rolling Stone declared him the greatest rapper that ever lived, and Billboard named him the greatest rapper of all time in 2015.
His unique lyrical style, which blended that storytelling, technical complexity, and humor, is now a foundational element of the genre. His rhymes and phrases are constantly sampled and quoted by modern giants.
Jay-Z, 50 Cent, Eminem, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, the list goes on.
And the tributes have been meaningful and centered on community impact, linking back to that idea of B.I.G. standing for more than just a name. His mother, Latore Wallace, drives his legacy through the Christopher Wallace Memorial Foundation,
which hosts the B.I.G. Night Out charity event.
And here, that iconic acronym is just beautifully repurposed to mean books instead of guns. It's an explicit acknowledgement of the violence that plagued his life, and an attempt to use his name to steer young people toward education and away from the life he left behind.
That community connection is also physically marked in his home borough. In 2019, the corner of Fulton Street and St. James Place, right near where he grew up, was officially renamed in his honor.
And his narrative just continues to inspire visual media, confirming his place in American mythology. You have the 2009 biopic Notorious, which was produced by his mother and managers.
And it featured that incredible moment where his own son, C.J. Wallace, played his father as a child.
More recently, the 2021 Netflix documentary Biggie, I Got a Story to Tell, provided these intimate insights that were approved by his estate.
And as a final fun pop culture connection, his imposing figure and complex persona directly inspired the Marvel Cinematic Universe's portrayal of the villain Cornell Cottonmouth Stokes in the Netflix series Luke Cage. His shadow just crosses into all forms of modern storytelling.
So we've traced the technical mastery, the profound geographical shift he orchestrated in hip-hop, and that incredible balancing act of turning grim, semi-autobiographical street content into colossal commercial appeal, all before the age of 25. He was, and he remains, an icon of duality.
It's truly a monumental legacy carved out of just a few brief, explosive years. But here's the final thought for you to consider, building on what we learned about his final year. Wallace explicitly stated in his last months that he wanted peace of mind and a focus on family, indicating a conscious shift away from the anger that fueled his earlier work.
Right.
So given the relentless pressure of the feuds, the constant legal harassment, the life-altering physical injury he sustained, and the psychological burden of being a figurehead in a deadly rivalry, what does his incredibly influential yet brutally short journey tell us about the actual, authentic cost of fame? And what's the price one pays for retaining authenticity in the rap industry, even decades after his death? Is business instead of game truly possible in that environment?
An important question to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of the Notorious B.I.G.
We'll see you next time.